My mother-in-law stole from me, broke into my home, then blamed me for breaking the family. She raided our house, sold our belongings, and stalked me for months while my wife defended every single move. When I finally pressed charges, they called me heartless. But the prenup saved me, and now? They're broke, out of my life, and I've got peace money can't buy. I met Carol about 6 years ago at a networking event through a mutual friend, and right away, she stood out. Not just because she was smart and charming, but because she didn't pretend to be someone she wasn't. She had this open, straightforward way of talking, and one of the first real conversations we had was about her family's financial situation. Most people would have danced around that topic or painted a polished picture, but not Carol. She told me her parents used to be loaded. Like, big house in an exclusive neighborhood, fancy imported cars, yacht on the weekends, kind of loaded. It was the kind of life I'd only seen in movies, and I remember struggling to even relate. According to Carol, though, things started falling apart because of a string of horrible investments and just generally irresponsible spending. Her parents, Richard and Eleanor, were always chasing some new flashy thing, buying luxury cars they didn't need, taking out loans they couldn't repay, blowing money on things that made zero long-term sense. Eventually, they got buried under a mountain of debt and had to sell their mansion, ending up in a much smaller condo. Carol kept saying they'd done their best and gave her everything she could have wanted, but over time, the stories she shared painted a messier picture, one that didn't match her words. One story in particular stuck with me, and honestly, it was the first time I felt real concern. On her 17th birthday, Carol had received a decent amount of money as gifts from relatives. Naturally, she was excited about it, it was hers. But that didn't last long. Eleanor, her mom, cornered her and started guilt-tripping her into handing over the money. She told Carol she needed it more, that Carol didn't understand the stress of running a household, and that as her mother, she had every right to use it. Carol was stunned to find out her mom had used the money to get a high-end salon perm. When Carol tried to confront her, Eleanor told her, without a hint of irony, that because she had provided food, shelter, and clothing over the years, she deserved that money. It wasn't even a conversation, it was a declaration. Richard, her dad, wasn't any better. In fact, in some ways, he was worse. He had a child outside his marriage, and when it came time to pay court-ordered child support, he pressured Carol to help. She was still a teenager with her first job, and he was already leaning on her to contribute financially. He constantly told her he couldn't afford it, that it was her responsibility to. And it didn't stop there. He regularly asked her to buy him things for their condo, fancy appliances, a massive TV, a brand new fridge, regardless of whether the ones they had still worked. And when she hesitated or pushed back, he would flip. He once threatened to smash her phone and her laptop, basically the only two things she truly owned that hadn't been taken from her in some way. Carol told me all this in this numb, detached way, like she'd long accepted it as normal. But to me it was jarring. It clashed with everything I'd grown up believing. Still, back then, I didn't fully understand just how deep that family dysfunction ran. I figured everyone had issues, and maybe, just maybe, with some distance and support, things could change. But in hindsight, those were the early signs, the red flags I should have paid more attention to. Growing up, my life couldn't have been more different from Carol's. I was raised in a modest, working-class neighborhood by two of the most decent, grounded people you could ever meet, my dad, John, and my mom, Mary. Dad worked as a mechanic at a local auto shop for over 3 decades, and Mom ran the bakery down the street, waking up before sunrise to make pastries and fresh bread every day. We didn't have much, but we had enough. My parents worked hard, saved what they could, and never made me feel like I was a burden. They made sure I had school supplies, clothes that fit, and dinner on the table. And despite the stress they must have carried, I never once heard them complain. Years later, after I graduated college and got settled in a good job, I managed to save enough money to do something I dreamed about for a long time. I bought them a house. Nothing extravagant, just a small, comfortable place in a quiet area. When I handed them the keys, my dad actually tried to turn them down, saying I shouldn't spend my money on them like that. It took real convincing to get him to accept it, and both of them cried. That was one of the proudest moments of my life. Even after that, they never asked for anything. In fact, they went out and picked up part-time work just to stay active, even though I offered to help them financially. They had this quiet dignity about them, always insisting that parents should take care of their kids, not the other way around. So when I eventually met Carol's parents, it was like stepping into a totally different world. I'll never forget that first dinner with Eleanor. Carol had arranged for us to meet at a nice restaurant, and I went in expecting a warm introduction or at least a polite conversation. But as soon as we sat down, Eleanor gave me a once-over, leaned across the table and hit me with, "So, are you rich?" No hello, no small talk, just straight to the point. I fumbled through an answer, saying something vague about having steady work and living comfortably. But that wasn't the end of it. After that dinner, it felt like Eleanor made it her personal mission to dissect every corner of my financial life. She'd ask these intense, borderline invasive questions, things like how much I had in retirement, what kind of health insurance I carried, what stocks I was invested in. If Carol was around, I could sometimes count on her to step in and ask her mom to back off. But even then, Eleanor didn't stop. She just got sneakier. She started cornering me at family gatherings or calling me directly when Carol wasn't home, always bringing the conversation back around to money. I remember one time I casually mentioned that I'd finally paid off my student loans, and her whole face lit up like I just announced I won the lottery. Immediately, she launched into this long speech about how I should help Carol with her debt now since I was doing so well. Thing is, Carol and I were still just dating at the time. That suggestion felt completely out of line, and it hit me in that moment. Eleanor didn't see me as her daughter's boyfriend. She saw me as a bank account. That conversation was when I first drew the line. I told her, as respectfully as I could, that I didn't feel comfortable discussing my finances with her, and that she needed to respect my boundaries. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. It didn't take long after that awkward dinner for the money requests to start rolling in full force. Eleanor would call Carol constantly, sometimes multiple times a day, with one financial emergency after another. 1,000 here for a medical bill, 500 there for a car repair, sometimes even more. It was always urgent, always framed as life or death. She'd be crying on the phone, saying she didn't know who else to turn to, and Carol, who was just trying to keep everyone happy, would cave almost every time. She'd try to hold her ground, telling her mom she was trying to save, that she couldn't keep giving like this, but the guilt trips always followed. Eleanor would remind her of everything she'd supposedly sacrificed over the years, how much she'd given up as a mother, and that no good daughter would say no in her shoes. She always promised to pay Carol back, of course, but not once did that ever happen. And if Carol brought it up later, Eleanor would explode, calling her ungrateful, selfish, saying she didn't appreciate everything her parents had done for her. Then, like clockwork, a day or two later, she'd call back in tears, apologizing, blaming it all on stress or hormones or whatever else she could come up with. Then the whole cycle would repeat. Carol would cry to me about it, vent for hours about how emotionally draining her mother was, about how torn she felt, and I'd listen, I really would. But the second I said something, anything, to agree or offer an opinion, she'd snap. I'd say it wasn't right, or that her mom was taking advantage of her, and Carol would immediately turn defensive. She'd tell me I didn't understand, that I didn't know what her family had been through, and that only she could complain about her mom. It was maddening. I felt like I was being pushed into a corner, forced to bite my tongue while watching her slowly get pulled back into this unhealthy dynamic. And as much as I loved Carol, it was starting to wear on me. I couldn't be the emotional sponge anymore, absorbing her pain while being told to stay silent about the root of it. Eventually, I told her gently that I couldn't be her outlet for this stuff anymore. It was draining the life out of me, and more than anything, it was putting a wedge between us. I was trying to love her through it, to stay supportive, but love without boundaries only leads to resentment. And I was starting to feel it build, quietly but surely, like a pressure cooker with no release valve. When Carol and I finally decided to get married, I thought it might be the start of a new chapter. One where we could leave behind all the baggage and move forward together. Planning the wedding was exciting at first. Carol had her heart set on something elegant, a bit over the top in my opinion, but I didn't mind. I had saved up responsibly over the years and could afford to give her the day she dreamed of. But along with the excitement came the return of that old familiar tension. This time it wasn't just about her mother. It was about the two of us and the financial choices we were making together, or more accurately, not making. I brought up the idea of a prenup, not because I didn't trust Carol, but because I'd seen firsthand how money could ruin relationships, especially with her family's history. I wanted us to start our life together with clarity, with mutual understanding, and with protection for both of us. I thought she'd understand. Instead, she blew up. She accused me of not trusting her, of treating our marriage like a contract instead of a commitment. She cried, yelled, even threatened to call off the wedding altogether. She said love didn't need paperwork, that I was insulting her by even suggesting it. I tried to stay calm, to explain that it wasn't about her. It was about protecting the life we were building. But the more I tried, the more defensive she got. And of course Eleanor got involved. She called me directly, furious that I dared to bring up a prenup. She went on about how their family had honor, how I had nothing to worry about, and how she was personally offended by my suggestion. That's when I snapped. I told her flat out that her track record with money, especially the way she treated Carol, was exactly why I wanted a prenup. I didn't raise my voice, but I didn't sugarcoat it either. That conversation didn't end well. Carol was so furious that she packed up and left our apartment. She told me I had disrespected her family and made her feel like I didn't love her. I was crushed. I kept reaching out, trying to explain that it wasn't about love, it was about building a foundation. But she wouldn't answer my calls, wouldn't return my messages. I thought that might be the end. Then about a week later, she showed up at my place, unannounced and in tears. She told me she'd made a mistake, that she realized how much pressure her parents had been putting on her. Apparently, right after the fight, Eleanor and Richard told her they wanted to start managing her paychecks to help her budget better. That was the wake-up call she needed. She saw it for what it was, control, plain and simple. She apologized, said she understood my concerns now, and agreed to sign the prenup. I wanted to believe that this was a turning point, that we were finally stepping into our own story, just the two of us. We moved forward with the wedding, but in the back of my mind, something told me the storm wasn't over. It had just gone quiet for now. After the wedding, things didn't settle the way I hoped. Carol and I had a beautiful ceremony, and I tried to focus on the future, on us. But the tension that had always lingered in the background started creeping back in almost immediately. Eleanor, who had mostly directed her financial demands at Carol before, now began coming directly to me. She'd call multiple times a week asking me to cover random expenses. Hair appointments, dry cleaning, sometimes just cash with no explanation at all. I tried to be polite at first, explaining that I wasn't comfortable paying for those things, that I wasn't her personal bank account. But she doubled down, guilt-tripping me, saying she was old and struggling and that, as Carol's husband, I had an obligation to help her. I gave in a few times early on just to avoid fights. I told myself it was manageable, that it wasn't worth upsetting Carol. One of the more ridiculous moments was the refrigerator situation. Eleanor called me, insisting she needed a brand new stainless steel fridge with all the bells and whistles. Her current one worked fine, fully functional. I asked why she didn't ask Carol or even Richard. Her response, I had money so I should take care of it. When I pushed back, she burst into tears and called me heartless. Then she called Carol and told her if I didn't buy the fridge, she would have to, even though Carol made far less than I did. I caved again, bought the damn thing just to stop the madness. But that wasn't the low point. That came with the sweaters. My parents, who are the kindest, most thoughtful people, had hand-knitted matching sweaters for Carol and me as an anniversary gift. My dad even helped design them. They were meaningful, sentimental. When the package arrived, I tucked it away in the garage to surprise Carol on our anniversary. But when the day came, the box was gone. I tore through the garage, searched the whole house, nothing. I asked Carol if she'd seen it or maybe accidentally thrown it out. She hadn't. Weeks later, we visited Eleanor and Richard, and there they were, the sweaters hanging in their closet. I was stunned. I confronted Eleanor, and she first denied everything. Then she claimed she found the box outside by our trash cans. After more pressure, she admitted she'd been in our garage, saw the package, and assumed we didn't want it. She just took it. She actually had the nerve to say the sweaters were cheap and ugly and that she'd done us a favor by taking them. I was livid. I told her she had no right to rummage through our things, let alone steal something so personal. She just rolled her eyes. And when I expected Carol to back me up, to finally draw a line, she didn't. She defended her mother, said she probably didn't mean any harm, that I was overreacting, that I embarrassed her by making a scene. I couldn't believe it. Her mom had literally stolen from us, and still, Carol found a way to justify it. Not long after, Eleanor called again, this time demanding a new dishwasher. It made no sense. She and Richard lived alone, barely cooked, and yet she insisted it was necessary because all her neighbors had one. When Carol refused, Eleanor said she wished she'd never had a daughter like her, that any other child would be grateful to have such a giving mother. Carol broke down crying. I had already cut off contact with Eleanor after the sweater fiasco, but the next day, she texted me, asking me to buy the dishwasher to support Carol. She had just emotionally destroyed her daughter and now she wanted me to fund the reason for it. I ignored her. I showed Carol the message as proof, hoping it might shift her perspective. But instead, Carol told me she'd already drained a big chunk of her savings to order the dishwasher herself. She said she just couldn't take her mom's anger anymore. That moment hit me hard. I realized no matter how many lines were crossed, no matter how much was taken from us, Carol would keep letting it happen, and somehow, I'd always be the one seen as the problem. When Richard died a few months later, it was sudden and tragic. He was found on the street near their condo after a night of heavy drinking. Despite all the tension between us, it hit Carol hard. It hit Eleanor even harder, or at least, that's how it looked at first. But almost immediately after his death, the situation took an even darker turn. Richard had racked up a mountain of debt, some of it with dangerous people. Eleanor was suddenly left with threats, bills, and the pressure to pay it all off. She had to sell just about everything they owned to cover his loans, and when it was all said and done, she had nothing left. No savings. No home. No plan. Carol and I talked it over, and despite everything, we agreed to let her move in. It felt like the right thing to do. I hoped, maybe naively, that with Richard gone, and with Eleanor in such a vulnerable place, she might change. Maybe she'd finally appreciate us. Maybe we'd get a fresh start. At first, I welcomed her with warmth. I wanted her to feel safe and cared for. But it didn't take long before the old patterns returned, this time inside our own home. I started noticing small things out of place. Drawers not closed all the way, storage bins slightly shifted, papers shuffled. It didn't happen when we were around, only when we were out or in a different room. It was subtle, but it was there. I confronted Eleanor gently at first, asking if she'd been going through our stuff. She brushed it off, saying she was just curious, just looking around, no harm meant. I asked Carol to step in, to set some real boundaries. Her answer was always the same, let it go, she's grieving, or she's just bored. But it didn't stop. Then things started disappearing. At first it was little stuff, decorations, a few books, a pair of coasters. Then it escalated. Some of Carol's jewelry went missing. One of my watches. Decorative vases. We had no visitors and nothing was broken into. But right around the same time, Eleanor started coming home with new clothes, new shoes, accessories. Stuff she couldn't possibly afford. She had no job, no income, no explanation. It didn't take a genius to figure out she was selling our things. I gently brought it up to Carol. I didn't accuse, just shared my concern. But Carol shut it down immediately. She said her mother deserved a few nice things after everything she'd been through. That I needed to stop assuming the worst. I told her I didn't mind her mom treating herself, but not by stealing from us. Not by pawning off our belongings. But she didn't see it that way. Then came the moment that broke everything. One afternoon, I got home early from work. Carol was still in her office and I headed to the bedroom to take a shower like I usually do. When I came out, there was Eleanor, standing by my dresser, my wallet in her hands, thumbing through it like it was hers. For a moment I was frozen, not even sure I was seeing it right. Then I snapped. I demanded to know what she was doing, why she was in our room, why she was touching my stuff. She went pale, stammered something incoherent, looked like a kid caught stealing from the cookie jar. I told Carol that night, thinking finally, this would be the moment she couldn't defend anymore. But instead of outrage, I got another excuse. Carol assumed her mother just needed some cash, that it wasn't a big deal. She actually said that maybe I should let her take money if she needed it. And then, as if that wasn't enough, she accused me of judging her family, of thinking I was better than them because of how I grew up. She said my childhood made me too rigid, too unforgiving. That hit me hard. It was a cheap shot and one that came from somewhere deep. I went on a long walk that evening, trying to make sense of it all, of how I got to a point where I had to put locks on my own dresser in my own house just to protect my wallet from my mother-in-law. I wanted to believe Carol would eventually wake up to what was happening. But that hope was getting harder to hold on to. And deep down, I was starting to understand that love without limits wasn't love at all. It was surrender. Everything unraveled the day Carol called me at work in a panic. She'd gone home on her lunch break to check on Eleanor, like she often did, but this time, her mother was gone. Not just out for a walk or a quick errand, gone. Completely. Her room was empty. Her clothes, her toiletries, every trace of her was missing. Carol tore through the house, trying to figure out what had happened, and that's when she realized her credit card was missing. Not only that, but a sizable amount of her jewelry, some of it heirloom quality, was gone too. No note. No explanation. No answered calls. Just vanished. Carol called me sobbing, terrified that her mom would max out her card or pawn the jewelry for quick cash. My first instinct, without hesitation, was to tell her we needed to report it. Call the police. This wasn't a misunderstanding or an accident, this was theft. Plain and simple. But Carol lost it. She screamed at me through the phone, saying I couldn't seriously expect her to turn her own mother over to the cops. That I was being cruel and heartless. That I didn't care about what she was going through. I tried to reason with her, told her that if anyone else did what Eleanor just did, we wouldn't hesitate. That just because she's family doesn't make it less of a crime. Carol didn't want to hear it. She said she was done talking and hung up. I sat there at my desk staring at the wall, feeling completely gutted. Not just by Eleanor's betrayal, by Carol's reaction. I wasn't angry at her. I was exhausted. There's a kind of emotional fatigue that builds when you keep fighting the same battle, over and over, with someone you love. I felt like I'd been walking through a fog for months, maybe years, trying to keep our life together while this slow, invisible current kept pulling us apart. That night, I showed Carol the last message Eleanor had sent me, the one where she had the audacity to ask me to buy her the very dishwasher that started their last argument. Carol didn't say much at first. She looked tired, defeated. Then she whispered that she had already ordered it herself, using her savings. She said she couldn't stand hearing her mother scream like that again. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. That moment was the clearest picture of our marriage I'd ever seen, Carol draining herself dry, emotionally and financially, just to avoid conflict. Me standing on the sidelines, powerless to stop it, resented for even trying. That's when it hit me, not like a sudden crash, but like a slow, deep breath I hadn't taken in a long time. I realized I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep pretending things would get better when all the signs pointed in the opposite direction. I didn't want to live in a house where I had to lock my own drawers. I didn't want to be married to someone who couldn't say no to the person hurting us. And I definitely didn't want to keep waking up every day wondering which piece of myself I'd have to give up just to keep the peace. The breaking point wasn't a scream. It wasn't a fight. It was a moment of stillness, a quiet, internal truth that I couldn't ignore any longer. It didn't happen all at once, but when I finally made the decision to file for divorce, it felt like the only path left. I had tried. I really had. I listened, I compromised, I stayed silent when I probably shouldn't have. But I couldn't do it anymore. The day I sat down with the lawyer and signed the paperwork, I didn't feel triumphant, I felt gutted. I never thought our marriage would end like this. Carol had already blocked the stolen credit card, but when I brought up the jewelry, her focus wasn't on justice or accountability. Instead, she asked me to replace it. Her reasoning? That since it was my coldness and distance that drove her mother away, and her mother took the jewelry, then it somehow fell on me to make it right. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was twisted logic, and I told her flat out, no. I wasn't replacing stolen heirlooms just because she refused to call the cops. I told her I was done with her family, with the endless emotional gymnastics. That's when the screaming started. She yelled, cursed, said I never truly loved her. Then she went after my parents, made a few cruel comments about how low class they were. How I always acted like I was better than her family because mine had dignity. That was it for me. I told her to pack up her things and leave. She stormed out and went straight to Eleanor's. I thought that might be the end of it, but of course it wasn't. The calls started within days. Both of them blowing up my phone, sending long texts alternating between apologies and accusations. Carol even had the nerve to call my mother. But thank God for my parents. My mom told her calmly that she supported whatever decision I made, even if she didn't know all the details. That support meant everything. I hadn't told them the whole story yet, but I planned to. I changed the locks, bought security cameras, not because I expected anything extreme, but because deep down I couldn't ignore the possibility anymore. And then, sure enough, things escalated. Within a couple of months, Eleanor started showing up in places I didn't expect. My job, restaurants I frequented. She even tossed a drink at me once, right in the middle of a casual hangout with friends. I tried to keep my cool, hoping she'd eventually fade out, but she kept showing up. Outside my house, tapping on the windows, calling my name from the sidewalk like something out of a bad movie. I still tried to handle it privately, not wanting to drag things through the legal system. But then she crossed a line, broke my bedroom window while I was home. That was it. I called the police. I had no choice. I was tired of being hunted in my own life. Carol, of course, was furious. Said I should have handled it differently. That Eleanor was just going through something. I actually laughed when she said that. There was nothing left to say. I told her her mother was lucky I didn't press charges the first time. That I had every right to defend myself, my home, and my sanity. Carol begged me to forgive Eleanor, but I was past that. There's no forgiveness for someone who stalks you, breaks into your home, and then plays the victim. I finally told my parents the full story, every last detail. They were shocked I'd waited so long, but completely stood by my decision. I warned them to stay alert, though I doubted Carol or Eleanor would go after them. Eventually, Carol bailed her mother out of jail. I sent Carol the bill for the broken window, told her that if she didn't pay, I'd take legal action. They finally paid, probably just to avoid more trouble. The divorce was finalized soon after. It was clean thanks to the prenup. She tried to go after spousal support and a piece of my savings, but it didn't work. That document protected me exactly as it was meant to. She begged, argued, tried everything, but the court didn't budge. And for the first time in what felt like years, I could breathe. I felt light. Not happy, not yet, but free. People underestimate how heavy emotional chaos can be. How much of yourself you lose trying to fix what doesn't want to be fixed. I don't hate Carol. I think part of her is still that kind, warm woman I met years ago. But she let her mother dictate our life. She let someone toxic infect every part of what we were trying to build. And in the end, she chose her. I walked away not because I stopped loving her, but because I finally started loving myself again. Now that it's all behind me, I've had time to really sit with everything, to untangle what happened, how it happened, and what it taught me. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that boundaries aren't walls meant to keep people out. They're doors that only the respectful are allowed through. I didn't set mine early enough, and by the time I did, the damage had already seeped into the foundation of our marriage. I let too much slide under the excuse of keeping the peace. But peace bought with silence and self-neglect isn't really peace at all. It's quiet suffering. I spent years trying to make something work with someone who couldn't say no to chaos. Someone who saw love as unlimited sacrifice, even when it meant losing herself, and me in the process. I don't blame Carol for everything. I believe she was trapped in a cycle long before I met her, and sadly, she chose to stay loyal to the pain she knew rather than fight for something healthier. But at some point, love has to include self-respect. And if the person you're with can't or won't protect the relationship from outside harm, whether that's toxic parents, manipulation, or betrayal, then love becomes a one-person job. Since the divorce, my life has slowly started to feel like mine again. The house is quiet, and for the first time in a long time, that quiet feels peaceful, not suffocating. I'm not constantly on edge, waiting for the next crisis or checking my wallet to make sure nothing's missing. I can finally breathe in my own space. My parents have been incredible throughout all of this, patient, supportive, never once saying "I told you so." Just reminding me in their own gentle way that dignity and decency still exist, and that I come from it. I've reconnected with old friends, focused on work, and started rebuilding the parts of myself that got buried under all that dysfunction. I even started therapy, not because I felt broken, but because I wanted to understand why I let it go on for so long. If you're reading this and find any of it familiar, if you feel drained, confused, constantly second-guessing yourself, pay attention. That's not what love is supposed to feel like. It's okay to support your partner through tough family dynamics, but it's not okay to be collateral damage in the process. You're not selfish for wanting peace. You're not heartless for saying enough. If I could go back, I'd still love Carol. I'd still try. But I'd speak up sooner. Set firmer boundaries. And I'd never again let someone else's dysfunction make me question my worth. This chapter of my life is closed now, and while it was painful, it also woke me up. I'm not bitter. Just wiser. and grateful for the freedom, for the lessons, and for the chance to start over without apology.